pleased to see so many of you here, especially the guys who who came to this session. I hope it's not all technicians, that they actually came to listen. Because we are so, it's so important that obviously if we talk about women's leadership that men be an essential part of the conversation. So can you imagine this panel of alumni? I mean, isn't this amazing? It's just, you know, we're TC alumni, I guess would be the appropriate plural Latin noun for female graduates. Where TC alumni have gone and the varied careers that they lead. I mean, you know, Gayle is an entrepreneur. She's starting companies in the tech sector right there in Silicon Valley. It's actually San Francisco, but in Silicon Valley. Major General Irene Trowell-Harris, I can barely, first of all, she's a major scholarship donor in addition to this incredible career and, of course, her service to women veterans, to women warriors, and representing TC in this incredibly important arena. Ayanna, who heads a school where so many of our students go on to lead schools and has so much to contribute to tell us about what leadership means when we're carrying out the most precious mission, the education of young people. And of course, my own Katie Conway, who's my deputy chief of staff, but Katie's academic work focuses on faculty life and faculty development, and she's looked specifically at women's issues in academia. So it's an incredible panel, and we're so lucky, and because the topic is incredibly important. Here at TC, 76% of our student body are women, and actually I thought it was higher, so that's good, it's going down. Only here would you say that. We need to just have more of a mix, and it's critical that we have this discussion here, and you know that the issues surrounding women in leadership, pay disparity, women's status in the workplace are conversations that have been part of TC's history. We were founded by a woman, Grace Dodge, whose focus was on the education of women. She was looking at teaching teachers, young women, to work with the newly arrived immigrants in New York City at the time, and we walk in her footsteps. And of course, these issues are right now on the national agenda as never before. Just earlier this week, President Obama signed measures aimed at making a dent in the persistent pay gap. Women make only about 77 cents on the dollar compared to men, and the disparity is even more pronounced for women of color. The president called it embarrassing and unacceptable, and he's right, but why are we still here? Why are we still at this point? I mean, we've come a long way. Just think of TC's history since the days when Maxine Greene used to have discussions in the ladies' lounge on campus because the faculty club did not admit men. Did not admit women, only admitted men. And nationally, women compose 60% of students earning master's degree. There are more law students who are women, more medical students who are women, more dental students who are women. But then what happens? Women hold only 4.6% of Fortune 1000 CEO positions. 4.6%. And in the STEM fields, which are so vital to our future, women fill less than a quarter of the jobs. In academia, 31% of full-time STEM faculty are women, and of STEM deans and department heads, only 27% are women. So we have a lot of work to do. We need to understand, navigate, and ultimately dismantle these barriers. So this morning we're going to draw on the wisdom of our alumni panelists and also from the collected wisdom in the audience. We'll ask you for questions and comments later in the program. I'm going to start with some questions to the panel to begin with. So in addition to all this political interest, thank goodness, there have been a spate of books about women in leadership. Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook tells us to lean in which means, I suppose, speaking up at work. Barna President Deborah Spar both say that the individual has to take a lot of the responsibility. The individual woman has to take a lot of responsibility for promoting herself in the workplace. And a lot of critics have said that downplays the age-old discrimination and the structural issues and the social and economic political realities. So as you think about this in your own career, how do you talk about the balance between your own initiative as an individual woman and the issues that you see, the broader issues at play out there? And for this question, we'll just start right down the road. Gayle?
Sure. So thinking a lot about that in terms of being in a leadership role, I think that especially as a woman, if you want to affect change in these spaces and you have the ability to do that through policies and practices where you work, I think it's extremely important to make those things happen. And I'll give you two examples for us, which is one of the things that we're very agile about as a company is reaching out to folks and allowing them to work from wherever they are. What that's done for us is it's allowed us to hire women who might be in a transition phase. These are rock stars. They're well educated, but they now have young children. And so their mobility and their agility in terms of commuting, et cetera, is tricky. And so we have the luxury as a company of being able to contract with a lot of these women, allow them to work from where they are, and we're very outcomes focused. So when they say things to me like, well, how many hours a day should I work? How many hours a week? What I say is I need these outcomes accomplished, these deliverables by these periods of time. That's what I'm focused on, however you can do it. And 9 times out of 10, it's when their children are napping, when their children are out somewhere else. They get incredible work done. We need to create more opportunities for that. The other thing is within our work environment, flexibility of hours. It's tricky when you're in schools. We're a company, so it's a little bit different. But we have folks who are able to come in extremely early after they drop off their children from school and then leave earlier in the day in order to pick their children up. And then what they'll say to us is they're so grateful. They'll say, and I'm happy to log on tonight and put in 3 or 4 more hours. What happens is it's a relationship, so people are more willing to give back when you are flexible with them. And that's what we want to have, that kind of culture. It doesn't work for everyone because not everyone is interested in that, but those who want to take advantage of it, we want to provide those opportunities. So I would say that one is creating that for others, and then in turn taking that for yourself. So that might look very different for a young worker in our culture, a woman who, let's say, wants to be able to go to the gym during the day. Terrific, please go do that. Keep yourself healthy. I think that's extremely important. And then what are the healthy food options we can provide people as snacks when they're in our work office during the day? All of those things create for, I think, a much more healthier, robust, women-supporting culture. So.
Thanks, Gayle. Irene?
Yes, thank you. The first thing I would advise people to do is get the seat at the table, but you must be prepared. For example, I pursued a graduate education. I had great mentors and sponsors, and I took advantage of every opportunity, even when it was risky. Now, because sometimes we don't want to risk because we think we're going to fail or there are barriers there, but in my situation, I used those failures as an opportunity to grow. My goal was to look at working full-time, at the same time being on committees and councils to make policy and legislative changes. I want the door open, but I want it to stay open. Mm-hmm. So we need to meet the women where they are, whether it's in the civilian community, federal, or military. And that's what I had done. In my civilian role, after working for many years as a nurse, I went to work with the American Nurses Association because they're the organization that represent the 3.1 million nurses nationally. They work with the policy issues. I want to be at the table making policy. In the military, I went from first lieutenant to general, 2-star general. Now, in that role, I did my job, but also served on policy committees to make change for the entire military. It's called the Secretary of Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services. It's called DACOWITS. That committee looked at all women, all services, all eras. Education, policy, leadership, child care, work-life balance, promotion, opportunity. Again, being at the table, looking at policy issues to make substantial permanent changes there. When I went to the federal service, I was a political appointee for two presidents as the Center for Women Veterans Director, working for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, looking at all the policy and legislative issues regarding women. It's fine to have great education, experience, but sometimes we need policy changes. So as part of that position, I was advisor to the Secretary on all those policy issues, but specifically legislation changing benefits, health care, and how women are treated in the military. Now, as part of that, I was on the White House Council of Women and Girls. That is a committee at the White House that looks at 29 plus federal agencies across the spectrum, looking at women's issues. Again, policy, promotions, legislation, because we want the door to be open, not just now, but in the future. So that's the reason I serve on those particular committees. And I have to tell you about, in order to make sure that door stays open in the federal, civilian, and military arenas, I established in December 2013 the Irene Trowell-Harris Leadership Fund at the American Nurses Foundation. The press release comes out next week. That is to make sure the door is open forever. These fellows are going to be in training for a year. They're going to work with the State Nurse Association and their local congressional representatives and the state legislator. Throughout their career, I think the jungle gym, you read about it in the book, at the end of their career, I want them to jump, become members of the House and Senate. Yeah. And we all out there can support these women. Again, you're at the table at the highest level.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. So exciting.
I'll lean in a little bit.
Lean in, yeah.
Lean in.
I think we all have leaned in at some point in our careers
Right.
and lives,
Right.
right? We have no choice but to do that. I just want to tag on to what you stated earlier a little bit, Gayle, about being in a school. And I think there is a little less flexibility with altering schedules. I mean, for goodness sake, we are there to oversee the kids, and we don't have much flexibility with that. However, I do think there is a level of responsibility for all of us, both women and men, to help bring women to the table of decision-making as well as of leadership. In my role as head of school, I was brought to that table through a sponsor, and they talk a little bit about that and lean in terms of the difference between mentors and sponsors, and I am a big advocate of both, as well as life coaches and a list of other things. But the former head of my school brought me to the table. He called me when I was at another school and asked me to come back to school to be the dean of students. He didn't have to do that, but he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think as women, a lot of times we don't have the level of confidence that we need to put ourselves out there and to lean in. So it's very important to have those sponsors and to have those mentors. And for me, I look at that as an obligation now for me to do the same exact thing with my staff or with other women. Part of what we do, you would think in independent schools there's a lot of opportunity for women to become leaders. And really the sad case is most of those women stay in the classroom, and that's great. We need strong women in the classroom and educating our students. But we also need women at the decision-making table and running schools and organizing and planning and changing policy. So at any rate, one of the things that I do is I'm involved in a Women in Leadership seminar that is specifically for women who are in independent schools, K through 12, who need those mentors and those sponsors. There's 6 or 7 heads of school that we take a weekend twice a year, and that's what we do. We mentor and sponsor other women. We talk about our roles as heads of schools. We talk about balancing multiple constituencies in our life. We open up about our stories and share our public persona versus our private persona. We allow these women to ask questions that you might not be able to ask if we were just in a professional setting. Because women in leadership, there's a lot of different things that are a lot of things that are very different for us when we consider taking on that mantle. And sometimes you don't have that person to go to ask those questions. So I absolutely think it's important that we turn around and reach out and help bring people to the decision-making table.
Thank you. So, Katie, besides praising your boss for the flexibility,
That's an obvious.
Flexible should be.
Although President Fuhrman is one who absolutely follows Gayle's lead, in that I work when I work, and that allows me to go pick up my kids at 3:30 most afternoons, and sign back on at 7 when they go to bed and do 3 or 4 hours of work. But that said, one of the things that both Sheryl Sandberg and Deborah Spar talk about in treating everybody to lean in, they sort of bring up this idea of privilege and of resources, and that telling people to lean in and get a seat at the table means having some of that privilege and some of that resource. And as a result, then they go on not to talk about those who don't have those privileges and those resources. Sheryl Sandberg lives down the street from where I grew up. She has a staff of many and a husband with an incredible flexible career. Deborah Spar has similar support at home. In her book, she essentially says if you don't have grandparents nearby when you have small children, you're out of luck. And as someone whose grandparents are 3,000 miles away, or my kids' grandparents are 3,000 miles away, that resonated with me. It's hard. My kids are sick. What do I do? So there was a third book that came out in this sort of pantheon of what do working women who want a seat at the table do in the last year, called Maxed Out, American Women on the Brink, or American Moms on the Brink, by a woman named Katrina Alcorn, and I really highly recommend it. What she's done is take many of the same personal stories and wisdom about leaning in, about being at the table, about working hard, and combined that with social and economic research about what barriers exist, and how we can, as a society and as institutions and as leaders, think about making it possible for all women, not just those who already have privilege and resources, to be able to do those things. So that, I think, is a broader part of the conversation that we're not always having, and we should be having more.
Thank you, Katie. So I think the emphasis so far on being at the table when the rules are set, it's not just you yourself paving a path, but making sure that, as Irene puts it, the door stays open. And also this notion of what resources women have to be able to bring, as you called it, privilege, and, how we can marshal the resources for those who don't have the privileges. I have not read Maxed Out, but I imagine it's about juggling, which we all do, and always have done. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in any order that you care to answer on how you manage that. I mean, there's husband, children, but there are also parents. We're the caregivers for our parents. How does all that fit in?
So I would say that one of the things I've learned over the course of my career is to ask for help. I would tell you, it's true confessions. I have not been very good at that, and I've had to learn that skill. I think it's an important skill for women. I think it's an important skill for women who are highly achievement oriented. We want to be the person who does it all. We want to be the person who doesn't need the help, and the reality is we do. And so for me, what that has turned into is being much more open to asking for help, asking for support. Of course, being transactional about it, making sure that I'm also giving something along the way, but recognizing that that is not a weakness. Instead, that is a tremendous strength, and it is showing capacity for vulnerability in, I think, the best sense, which is being able to show people that you're a human being. And in a leadership position, you don't have to give that up. I think sometimes we think that that makes us have to sort of fall into a category or be perceived in a certain way. When you can show you're vulnerable and that you need support, what I find is that people rally around you even more, and that it actually strengthens the relationships. They become much more reciprocal. I think it's also recognizing that there are certain ways that you want to be able to give back yourself. So this whole juggling piece for me has become, how do I sit with other people and talk about how are they juggling? Learn from them. Unlike probably maybe everyone on this panel, I'm not sure. I don't know Irene as well as some of the other members, but I don't have children. And that was a very conscious choice. My husband and I, in terms of goals and things we wanted to accomplish and things we wanted to do, but I am extremely sensitive to that when I work with others and have people in my own work environment. That is something, too, I think, being open to the fact that there are trade-offs and there are sacrifices to achievement as well, and that to be open and honest about that. I think the notion of you can have it all, I think that that is not necessarily a good notion to hold on to. I think there are sacrifices. Having elderly parents myself, making myself available to that when they have been ill, when, in the case of my dad, when he's passed on, making time for that and space for that, those are hard times in your life, and I think that it enriches you and builds capacity, and ideally gives you empathy for others. So those are some of the things, but I would say it is not easy, it's a constant negotiation, and it is also recognizing to reach out, ask for help in all the different ways that is. I would add to that I've also traveled a lot in my work, and I would say that per what Irene said, take those risks, take those chances, and build relationships when you move into a new space and a new opportunity that are separate from work. You need those networks, you need that support. You can't continually just necessarily be relying on your professional space. It's very important. It's also very hard. So treasure those relationships you have that you've had a long time, but you have to keep building them where you are, or as a woman in leadership, it can be very lonely. And I think increasing that capacity is very important.
Yep.
Yes, it's definitely not easy to juggle, and my experience has been a little bit different. Since I came from a very low-income family with 10 brothers and sisters, I ended up financially supporting my parents almost throughout their entire life, assisted my brothers and sisters through medical school, flight school, nursing, and medical. And later on, when both parents were ill, I flew back and forth to Aiken, South Carolina to help take care of them, alternating with my sister that's a nurse. And later on, my brother, who was a physician, died of pancreatic cancer. His wife died shortly after that of kidney cancer. I ended up getting 3 kids with a trust to run, still trying to manage my career with all the other things going on. But I did ask for help. We were from a fairly large family, and think about all these things happening at the same time while I'm trying to maintain my leadership position, mentor others, and really keep inspiring people out there. But in spite of all of that, we were able to manage, and I did ask for help, and people were wonderful, and they will come and help you out in situations like that.
For me, I am in the midst of sort of that sandwich where I have aging parents and I also have young kids. And I have, in the last few years, gotten rid of the notion of balance, because for me, when you say the word balance, it implies that all parts are equal. Yeah. And there are some days that I am the worst mother ever. There are some days that I'm the worst head of school ever. Some days I'm the worst person ever. There is a flip side. Some days I'm the best at all those things. However, I've let go of that a while ago, that I can never be all good things to everyone, including myself. So there's some days that I look at my sort of circle and I go, you know what, I haven't spoken to a friend in about 2.5 weeks, and I haven't done X, Y, or Z, and I stop and I do those things because that's what's important for me. But I think many times, particularly women in general, we have a hard time of letting go of that guilt. And once you can start doing that and realizing you're not perfect, and when you do have it all, there are risks and sacrifices to that, and to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, I am doing what makes me happy. There are days when I want to be entrenched in my work because I absolutely love it, and that's what fulfills me. And quite frankly, sometimes going home to, screaming kids doesn't.
Never.
No, never. However, seeing that goal that my, son does on the soccer field, that fulfills me. So taking those things of, life that we just have to be honest with ourselves as women and realize, this is what it is, this is what we want, and appreciate the good and the bad. So that's my personal journey.
So just quickly, there's an idea called, in the workplace literature, called covering or uncovering. And it basically says, how much am I, when I come to the workplace, having a sick kid at home, having a struggling parent, having whatever else is going on in my outside of work life, how much do I cover that up when I come to the workplace or make that known? And I think one of the challenges, particularly for women, is how much you uncover what else is going on in your life. I am really lucky to work in a workplace where I hope it's okay that I uncover a fair bit of it.
Of course.
You'll be meeting with her later.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as you don't make me sick.
My husband works in a place where there is not a single woman with children and not a single wife of any of his colleagues with children who works. Not a one. So his colleagues have really very little in the way of childcare responsibilities. And his attempts to uncover his role in our family, which is a substantial one, are met with, I would say, confusion. And so there are those who argue that men really, really, really need to uncover their family responsibilities in order for it to become a more comfortable thing for women to do so, as they often have to do. But I think that's a really interesting question. If you're trying to move ahead in a world that doesn't necessarily accept the need to have a work-life balance or whatever that phrase should be, but doesn't yet accept that, how much do you bring that to the table?
Does anybody else want to answer that? Do you uncover what else is
I
going
uncover all the time, I think, because I think it's important modeling. I think part of what we're talking about is being honest and being your authentic self. That's what leadership is. So I think it's very important. You know, a few weeks ago, my father was in the hospital, and I let my entire organization and board know that, because I wasn't going to be able to be present and engaged in the community because I had other responsibilities. Excuse me. So I think it's very important as women that we show that and allow people to see us not just as leaders, but as human beings, and that we have multiple facets of our lives that are equally important.
Yes, I agree, because we don't have a situation personally. You know, for example, in the military, women and men needed child care, and when they were working, and so we looked at legislation and policies to get that for the women. And for the women veterans, in order to go to work, many of them do not have those grandparents living nearby. Many of them cannot be employed, even though they can find a job, unless they have child care. So we did legislation working with different groups out there to get child care support for those women. So we need to look at the whole family in our leadership position and say, what does that family really need? It may not be education initially. It could be child care support, could be transportation, but we need to provide whatever she or he needs so they can function in the society.
And again, seeing the transition, I worked in schools for many, many years, and now seeing the transition in being a founding member of a company where we can actually make these things happen, what I've been really impressed by is the men in the organization who are full participants in their role as dads, who will come to us as they're negotiating a contract and say, I want to be able to pick my child up from school during the day, or I want to be able to go to this event, or I have this situation going on. And what happens is you have women who do it, and then you have the men who do it, and what it is it's very accepted practice. It's nothing, there's no exception now. I think it's very powerful, and I don't know if part of that is, again, a different culture and a different climate, but I see it, at least in our work culture, as a very open space, and it's very different from what I experienced in schools, where it wasn't as much that you could always bring your full self to your job. Here people do, they accept it, they expect that you actually will honor that and be respectful of it, and that you will create a culture that really embraces that, and it just changes the entire workspace. So it's really wonderful to hear how important that is to everyone, and the fact that we want to keep building that.
So in the spirit of uncovering, I'll share a personal story. I didn't work full-time until my youngest was 9, my oldest was 17. That oldest told his niece, my granddaughter, that I was never home. He said, this is many years later, he said, Grandma was never home. So, but as you're right. As Katie knows, Thursday, he posted a picture of me when I was 28 on Instagram, and wrote this long paragraph about how I was the most caring, supportive mother ever, and that I'm a rock star, and he tells that to everyone. I'm getting teary about
As
it.
you should.
And I look just like I looked then, except that I'm way, way, way more successful. So who knows? I mean, you do what you can, and who knows? This is the kid who thought I worked too hard and wasn't around, and yet, all these years later, this is what he thinks. So juggling is hard, and you kind of, I guess the point is you never know exactly where you are. If you've caught the ball or not, it's not entirely clear, and you may not know until later. So moving on with the personal, my daughter-in-law, who's a lawyer, is not working. She's home with my grandchildren. I don't even know if I make her guilty because she's so conflicted about this choice that she's made. She didn't love law, but she could have gone back into anything, but she decided not to. And I find talking to our own graduate students all the time that this is really continues to be a hard choice.
Yes.
These young women, many of them are opting to stay home, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that. Katie, you?
I will start probably, I'm guessing, from a different place than others at this table. I would choose to stay home if I didn't have the flexibility that I have. I am very lucky and very privileged to have that choice at this point in my life. And it is only because I am able to do really fascinating, interesting, engaging things that I care deeply about and still pick my kids up most days that I do that. And so I think that speaks even more to this need for increased flexibility. I would probably keep a foot in somehow, keep teaching, keep doing some research, but to really stay in the administration and that piece of things to the extent that I do because I also get to be present for my kids.
When I think of staying home, I kind of start thinking about what you said earlier, Katie, about privilege. I mean, I was born and raised in Philadelphia in a household that had two working parents. I am an only child. Staying home was just never an option. I was in daycare at 6 weeks old. I really honestly never thought of staying home, ever, because that's just not the culture I came from. That just wasn't the upbringing that I had. And I think a lot of that has, we don't talk about sort of the cultural or religious or racial or just upbringings we all bring into the conversation of gender and what that all means. So yeah, I think for me, it just was never an option just because of my background and who I am.
It is very difficult to do it all, and I think women should have a choice. It also depends on where you are in your career. Because I see people who work in full-time and have young kids, they're stressed out, et cetera, though. What we're looking at in the federal service and military, when parents, whether it's a male or female, when you had a child, they gave you time off. You get time off. Also, recently, we looked at some legislation in DACA, which if you're in the military, you could take 1 or 2 years off. That time you could be with a young child, but also take care of elderly parents or any reason like that. So it's like a placeholder. It doesn't work in all the situations, but women clearly need options, and they shouldn't be made to feel guilty regardless of the decision they make, because it depends on where you are, what your financial status is, and what your options are. So again, we need to give women the option, have them do their best when they're ready to come back full-time or whatever they want to do, support them.
I would say similar to Yanni, which is my background socioeconomically was never one where there was quote-unquote fallback. It just wasn't possible. When I was doing my graduate work at Teachers College, I did an MED and then my doctorate over a course of probably almost 10 years, part-time, because I worked full-time the entire time. Many people here do that. It's one of the things I love about TC is that that's expected and also accepted. But I want to throw something out there as well. I think that a lot of the books, Sheryl Sandberg's book, I think the conversations we're having, we're talking about the sacrifices you make with children. But I think we also need to be very aware of women in the workplace who, like myself, don't have children, but who do other things. I've actually worked in environments where I wasn't leaving during the day perhaps to go with a child, but I was leaving during the day for a professional opportunity and personal growth and professional growth. And it's interesting how those are often challenges to navigate, because it's almost more acceptable in some cases to leave early for childcare than it was for me to come here and take my night class at Teachers College. I was a school administrator at many points in my career where I had supervisors who were women, who would say to me, "Isn't it interesting that you're leaving early one day a week to come to a class at Teachers College?" My colleague who was a principal would turn, this is when I was an associate head, my colleague who was a principal would turn and say she needed to leave to pick up her child. That was perfectly acceptable. So I think we also need to be very aware of the fact that women are doing a lot of things, and women are in a lot of different situations. Some have children, some do not. But I do think sometimes it's even more threatening when what women are coming and going for in the workplace isn't just childcare. So I think we have to be very sensitive to that, because we're going to find people who, number one, may not be able to have children, or women who've made other choices in their lives. And I think this conversation about children is terrific, but I also think we need to look at there's a whole lot of stuff going on out there. The culture and climate that I work in, which is the startup world, is predominantly male. We have raised almost $20 million for our company. And when I go into those environments, what I'd like to see is more venture capitalists who are women. I'd like to see more women who are CEOs, who are in the C-suite. I would like to see more women when I go out to lunch during the day to take out prospective clients and customers, and I go to area restaurants in Silicon Valley that are filled with men. We need more women coding. We need more women programming. And women who do want to do those things, again, sometimes they're still considered kind of the other. Fortunately, in this climate and culture, they're not. But we need to be thinking about more and more about all the different roles women can play with and without children, and all the different ways that that needs to be part of our lives. And remember sometimes that the conversations we have about sort of the more traditional roles, we're willing to have those, but sometimes we're not willing to have the more uncomfortable non-traditional role conversations as well. So I want to throw that out in the mix.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely. Gayle, as you were saying that, I started thinking even sort of the need for us to take care of our own selves. That is often looked down upon, whether you want to go out to a doctor's appointment or to, take that Pilates class or to get a massage, or, for those of us who struggle with our hair all the time, to go to the, salon. Those are things that, are self-care.
Don't.
Well, there might be, but I think that's a very important point that you raise, and I think one that needs to enter into the conversation.
No, I think that's true, and also to be citizens.
Yep.
I mean, Irene talked about that the world is never going to get better unless we're at the table, but, serving on the school board, being a volunteer in an organization are all parts of how we contribute, and those all definitely all take time. Let's turn to leadership and how, we've talked a lot about having careers. How do we get to be leaders within those careers? And what factors do you think really enabled you to climb that ladder in any order?
I'll start.
Okay.
In my situation, it was a lot of mentoring. I had great sponsors, but I first had to really go out there and get an advanced education. In the beginning of my career, I wanted to be a flight nurse, and thinking about from a low-income family, not having ever been near an airplane. I did meet some nurses who were recruiting for flight nurses, and I did that, but it took a lot of people, me doing research work, contacting people who were flight nurses. Back then, when I became a flight nurse, there were very few minority nurses. But again, it was the mentoring, the sponsorship, the education, and looking at the politics. One of my military leaders schooled me on how the political system works, and it changes every day. But he was a great person to teach, and he gave examples. He was a role model. And he said to me, once you become a flight nurse, you don't just want to be a flight nurse, you want to be an instructor and an examiner, and that's exactly what I did. But it did take me a very long time to do this, but it was also the team effort. All the work I had done, even flying with the personnel on hospital jets, it was a team effort. It was everybody coordinating and collaborating to get the mission done. Same thing in the political area. As a leader, you can't do anything on your own. It takes the support staff. It takes everybody. But my success, I believe, became as a leader about collaborating and cooperation with everybody out there with the same policy interests. And once you put proposals up forth, you're most likely to get those things passed and funded, and hopefully without a sunset clause.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that question a little bit. Resonates with me because I was just having this conversation with a faculty member of mine who was very interested. She's a millennial, and she was very interested in the title and wanting to have the title. And what can I do to get the title, whatever the title is? And in thinking about that and leadership, a lot of times we don't separate the two, but we have to look at self-leadership. And I had this conversation with her that evolved. What is it that you actually love to do? What is it that you like? It's not about the title. It's about what drives you. It's about your passion. And leading in that area. You don't have to have the title to lead. So that leads me to sort of some of the things in my career that have helped me to get to the point where I am now, is really taking the time to do that self-reflection. I think as women, we don't do that enough. We don't take time for ourselves to get into that space of who am I? What is my leadership philosophy? What is my leadership style? Where can I gain additional support, skills, resources to help me in the area of collaboration or creativity, et cetera? And looking at that really through the lens of I want to learn, as opposed to I want the title. So that's just, reflecting on my last conversation this week. I thought that was probably a little bit in terms of leaning into this conversation about leadership. It probably tied into that.
Katie, why aren't there more women department chairs and?
So when I look at the research about this, there's a timeline issue.
Yeah.
Right? Whether you're in a field like the tenure track professoriate or big law firms where there's a really lockstep timeline, where if you don't make it to a certain point by a certain time, you're out, or you're in a place where that's maybe a little bit less explicit, it still tends to exist. And so I think given that many women are, whether on purpose or not, slowing down for some period of time, in a period of their career that coincides with that time when you should be leaning in as hard as you can. And I read all these articles about the finance world right now, where they're telling the kids to take a couple of days off a month, maybe on a Sunday. Right?
Sorry.
And that this is new. Please, you should take at least 3 days off a month. Think about doing it on a Saturday or a Sunday. And this is heralded as this huge change. And so I think you have women who say, I'm not going to do that, I can't do that. And so at the age of 29, they're already not being considered for the ladder that's going to get them to the leadership roles.
Yeah, wow. No, I know. So just before we turn it open to the audience, I'd love to hear from each of you. Who's your most important mentor? Just a little bit about, not the name, but a little bit about this person. Not you, Katie, we'll get to you later. I'm afraid to hear that it's not me.
I would have to say for me, it's probably my mom. And the reason I would say that is because my mother never told me there wasn't anything I couldn't do. She was my biggest cheerleader, my biggest champion, and still continues to be. And I think having someone in your life who sees you as having the potential to do anything at any time and who cheerleads it, I think is really powerful, especially if it's another woman.
I would have to say one of my military mentors and sponsors, even though I had other mentors early on, but he was a person that really schooled me about the politics and looking at the entire system and going from first lieutenant to general, but also along the way, he always said, you need to mentor, inspire, and bring others along the way. And he said that will pay off more for you than almost all the other things you can do. And later on, when I got promoted to 2-star, he came back to me and said, didn't I tell you that's what you need to do? And the military named a mentoring award after me because of that.
Oh.
That was my mentor.
I would agree, Gayle, with you. My probably biggest and most consistent mentor is my mom. And I would say a few reasons behind that is, number one, she was always the first one to say she was sorry or apologize and show some level of vulnerability. And for me, that's been very important in my career, in my life, to have that sort of level of it's okay when you're wrong, or if you make a mistake, just own up to it. The other thing is she was very persistent. She went back to school after I went to school, and she got ended up getting her MSW. And so for me, that was role modeling, and it showed me that if my mom, at age whatever it was she was then, is able to do this, then I'm certainly able to accomplish my goals. And like you said, Gayle, I think she's my biggest cheerleader. She's always pushing me to get out there, to put myself out there, and encouraging me along the way.
So I want to use two who have served really different roles. My dad is very much my first and biggest supporter, in the sense that he will tell me I can do everything and anything, and then tell me to please slow down a little bit because I seem a little bit stressed and overwhelmed. But by the way, you should still be doing that. He told me I should come out to Stanford and do an MBA while I was working full-time and finishing my dissertation stage seemed like a time where there was a lot of free time, so I should do an MBA during that period. And so that gave me really the idea that I could do whatever I wanted. And then Susan has made it possible for me to do that, because she lets me bring what I have to bring to the table, and also be who I want to be as a human being. She may or may not remember these conversations, but both times that I've come back from maternity leave, I have an almost 4-year-old and a just turned 1-year-old. And both times when I came back from maternity leave, at some point a month or so after I came back, I sat down in one of our weekly meetings and said, Susan, I'm really not sure that I'm doing what I need to be doing. You know, I feel like I'm not as good as I normally am, and so you tell me if this isn't working for you anymore. I will totally understand that. And both times she's sort of essentially hit me over the head with a piece of paper. And hopefully she really did feel that way. But so to have somebody who says you can do it, and then somebody who really makes that possible, without both of those things, I don't think it's really, I don't think the mentorship means as much as it could. So.
Thank you. It's your
And I
turn
would have
now.
said that anyway, even if you weren't.
Thank you, guys. It's your turn. Questions, comments? Susan?
I thought what everybody said at the beginning of the talk about being at the table and staying at the table and being a part of setting up environments that are supportive and balanced, so that when they kind of leave was really great. And I've been fortunate in my career to have been at places where that already exists. And I'm very lucky for that. And I'm wondering what each of you have done in leadership roles, if you've been somewhere where that did not exist, what steps perhaps you've taken internally to help change a little bit of the culture.
So I actually have been at places where it hasn't existed. The example I gave earlier, where I was in a culture where it was much more acceptable to leave for childcare but not for professional growth. I had a conversation with my boss about that. What I did was I said, you know, I need to talk to you a little bit about how I'm feeling when that particular situation has come up, and can we talk about it? And it was the first time, I think, that she had had a situation where someone had said to her, without sort of blaming or accusing, can we have a conversation? And when she understood how I felt, it changed everything. If I had stayed silent, I don't think that would have happened. And it certainly changed the way we operated as a culture from then on, because now I could be a very vocal advocate, not only on my own behalf, but on the many other women and men who wanted to go and do things there and should have been able to do that just as the childcare situation. So I think that for me, it's doing it in a way that shows that I want to be part of the solution, and I have some ideas to help with the solution. I think that when I've been part of the situations where people want to come and tell you what you're not doing right, what's not working, I think you shut the conversation down. But if you can be part of the solution, and I think Irene has said this several times today, and I think that this is so wise. Every culture and climate has a certain sense of politics. It's very real, no matter how small or how large. Get to know that culture, get to know that politics, find your allies. And also, Be thoughtful about that and do your research, because if you walk in and you do things and just say things, you might feel very empowered, but it will shut things down. It will often hurt what can happen for other people, and I think per Irene's words, it will close doors, it will not open them. So I think that that's important as well. And certainly now that I'm part of a culture where I'm able to create policies and practices, those things are always at the forefront of my mind.
During my career, I was in a position where there was no promotion opportunity. I did discuss this with my boss, my supervisor, and the person said, well, you know, if there was promotion opportunity here based on your education experience, you could probably get another position. So what I did at that time, start looking around I jumped, they call that jungle jump, when you leave that ladder. I left that ladder and jumped to another ladder. What I ended up doing is leaving the Office of Inspector General, but there was no promotion opportunity there. And that's when I started looking around and became that director for the Center for Women Veterans as a political appointee. So sometime you may have to change your corporation or where you are, but you need to look for opportunities. Again, I was taking a risk because I was very comfortable where I was, but then going to something highly political, a whole new world. But at that point in time, I was willing to take the risk to excel.
In my former position as the associate head of school, I had a head of school who was very threatened by other women who wanted to either learn or be in positions of leadership or have a seat at the table, if you will. And often those opportunities come up at other places. And I feel like as a woman and leader, it's my responsibility to help get as many women leaders there are possible in education, not just at my institution, but my previous employer didn't feel that way. So we had to have some really honest conversations when people came to us about wanting to leave or wanting to try something different, and how that really wasn't a reflection on us as an institution, but rather reflected how much we had shown those women what an honor it was to be a leader, and how we should be very, proud that we have women who are looking to us as, this is what I want to do. So I think part of the answer of that is really trying to have conversations to reset the mindset, if you will, to really make adjustments in that culture. I wasn't totally, completely successful, but we made some strides.
I think this is one of those places where uncovering comes in really as a really important thing. If I think about not just my academic department, but many academic departments, when I look at my research, I study the pre-tenure career for faculty members at elite research universities. And the vast majority of older faculty members who are women do not have children at elite institutions. Many women who had children were deemed unacceptable for tenure in relatively recent generations. And so the women who are now coming up don't have more senior faculty members and mentors to look to who have had children. And I have a reputation in my current department, which is also where I did my degree, as working full-time and yet having still gone through our doctoral program more quickly than almost anybody else did and doing a pretty good job of it. And so the master's students come in hearing that now, and I really view it as my responsibility to say to them, A, I got married really young, so I didn't have much of a social life during those years. B, I went to college at Columbia, and I continued to live in the neighborhood, so what social life I did have didn't need a whole lot of work because it was all here already. And C, I'm a mess sometimes, right? Yeah. This is hard. And so it's really important to keep doing it and showing that you're doing it and showing that it's possible and showing that you can do excellent work while also doing all of this other stuff. Just by showing the process in a more realistic way, I think you're showing the next generations of leaders that it's possible and that it doesn't have to look like some version of perfect. Yanni, this really brings me back to your conversation earlier this week, right? This is what title I want. Yeah. Tell me how I get there. And I think bringing it back to the content. What are you good at? What do you like?
Exactly. And in that conversation with this young teacher, I said, you know what? Let's I'm going to connect you with a few academic deans, this is the route you want to go, upper school heads, et cetera, and I would like for you to shadow them, because I want you to get the experience of what that day is. Because a lot of times, like you just said, their understanding or perception of what the job is from their lens. It's not from the reality. So I'm a big proponent in shadowing and getting people into a school or a situation where they might not be familiar with and actually experiencing that particular role for an afternoon even is eye-opening.
Yeah, so I obviously spent a lot of time talking to students and young faculty members, and what I try to ask them is, what do you want to know? What are the questions you want to answer that should guide your coursework, your projects, your dissertation, et cetera? It shouldn't be that you go into it saying, I want to do an ethnography. That's not the research question. That's a method you might employ.
Right.
But, you know, what if you don't have a burning curiosity about some field, you're not going to make it as an academic, and that's what's got to guide you.
Right.
And I would say the biggest change I found going from nonprofit to for-profit is that we bake it into our culture. So what we tell everybody we work with, we hire, and we expect it of each other as the leadership team. Make sure every week you're having coffee with someone you don't know. We use LinkedIn like nobody's business. We reach out to people, we don't know them, and we see where the fire catches. And what are we doing? We're typically saying 6 months down the road, we need to build this. We don't know how to do it, but we know that there are about 20 people out there who do. Let's reach out and see who'd be willing to have coffee with us, who we could take out to lunch. We hold each other accountable every single week to making sure that we go out there and have coffee or lunch with someone. And when I worked in schools for years, if you as an administrator in particular set foot off that campus to go have coffee or lunch with someone, your hands get slapped. We must incorporate that into our cultures. We network, we force each other to network, we build it in. It's how we do our best hiring, it's how we do our incredible mentoring, but it's baked into our culture from day one, and that didn't come from those of us who came from the education side. It came from those of us who actually came from the corporate side and said, this is really important to do. I think thank you for bringing up too sexual orientation and having different families and different family types. Again, I'm in San Francisco now, so it's a totally different ballgame in sense of it's incredible. And I know we talk a good game, but the reality is that San Francisco as a culture, it lives that good game. And it's life-changing to see that. It's life-changing to see something that Katie spoke about. People bring their full selves to their work environments every single day. And what I like is, if their employer doesn't allow it, it's just unacceptable. So.
With the military structure, I'm thinking the Army, as in the Air Force, we had the enlisted people that was in charge. What I did was work with all of the staff, but those enlisted soldiers, for example, I make sure they were well educated and trained to help me and take on some of those responsibilities where I wouldn't have to work 16 hours. Now, that's not easy to do, and I would like to talk to you also after this session, but what I also done was try to maintain that balance by going to the physical fitness center. I played racquetball, squash, and tennis, and those kind of things, just to make sure. But in the military, as you all know, that you have your full assignments, and you're in charge of hundreds of people, billions of dollars in budget. And sometimes the military volunteer you to do things. It's called voluntold. It's not volunteered. And I'm sure you've been in the same situation. But it's not very easy being in charge, because think about it. You're in a man's world. You have to be 4 times as good, to be acceptable. I'm talking about the reality of it. But looking at working with your staff and those assigned to you, we have to really make sure that they are well educated and trained in taking some of the responsibility. Because some of the things you're doing, they may be able to do. And that's what I had done. I couldn't be there 24/7 with the airplanes or with the flight physicals or the clinics or hospitals. So there's a way of taking a look at that, and like I said, I'll talk to you about that later on. But if you're going to spend all your time working 16 hours a day, you're going to get stressed out. And the question comes up, can you really be functioning and do your best job when you're stressed out? But again, I'll be happy to talk to you about that.
Good. So we have reached the end of our time. Thank you so much. I think it's been an incredible panel. Let's give them a hand.